everyone, it's Michelle from Scrap Secrets and welcome to another card making video. So this video is going to be a recreation of one of the first cards that I ever made. This is a challenge from Courtney Krieber. She asked us for this month's challenge to recreate the first card you ever made, and I don't have that one anymore, but I know this is one of the very first ones that I ever created because I remember learning easel cards back when I started, so I know this is one of the initial ones that I made. But unfortunately, I don't have the stamps and dies that I use anymore. So I found an MFT set that was similar, and I decided to use that. This one is MFT's Wild Things, and I used the solid dies to cut out the images first because the old dies were completely solid. They didn't have the see-through ones until much later. And I ran it through the Cuttlebug, popped the pieces back into my MISTI without the die cut in it, lined up the stamp, closed the MISTI lid, transferred the stamps over, and then put the die cut back in and stamped the image. They didn't come out perfect, but they came out close, and that was much better than I would have done if I would have stamped it first and then die cut it. So the next thing that I wanted to do was to heat emboss the sentiment. The initial sentiment says, "Hey diddle diddle, someone new, someone little." And I found an old stamp set from MFT called Beautiful Baby, and it has another nursery rhyme line in there. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, do you know how loved you are?" So I stamped that up with Versamark ink after I kind of just went over the piece of cardstock with my cloth, my Enviro cloth from Norwex. Now that just kind of took off some of the excess fingerprints and grease and stuff on it, and it worked okay. I used the American Crafts Zing embossing powder in charcoal. The initial one was done in black, and when I was over pulling out my embossing powders, I thought that I pulled out a black embossing powder. I pulled out a charcoal one. Close enough, it's a dark gray, and it still looks good with that, but I had originally meant to do it in black. So now I am going to pour the embossing powder over there, and then I'm going to take a paintbrush and kind of go around the edges and take off any extra embossing powder. My heat tool is not the greatest. I definitely need a new one. This is a Martha Stewart one, and it's very old. It went through moves, and I think that when I moved from house to house, and I think that it may have gotten damaged in it, so it eventually heated up correctly, but it took me a really long time. If you see here, I actually had turned it on way before this and let it heat up, and it heats up. It just doesn't emboss as fast as it used to. So I think I need to get the new Wagner one that everybody has been raving about. So hopefully I can do that. But here I am, just again, still heating it up, and it's hard to tell on some of the images, and I don't know if it's because it's a textured piece of paper, if it just didn't heat up correctly, I don't know, or it's the embossing gun, but I think it's the gun. I think it's time for a new one. It's probably been about 10 years. So anyway, I'm just brushing off the embossing powder just to make sure that it really did heat emboss, and then I'm going to take my ATG gun and run a couple pieces of tape behind that and line it up like I did in the initial one. The initial scalloped ones, those are from the same dies, but those dies are a lot bigger. So now I'm going to take my card base, which is a 5x7 cardstock, and score it at 5. So it's 10x7. I'm going to score it at 5 so it does a normal 5x7 fold-in card. Then I'm going to take it and open it back up and score at 2.5, and that's going to create the easel for it. So I'm going to use my bone folder and smooth that down and just make sure that I have enough room for everything. So the next part that I'm going to do is I used some cardstock on the initial background, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I found a star stencil from MFT, and this is called Stargaze, and it's older. It says it's from 2014, so this is probably one of the first stencils that I ever got. I took a piece of washi tape after I put it on my hand, and I masked off the top of the card. I could have folded it over, but I was afraid that I was going to get some ink on the back of it. Now I'm using a very large blender brush and the Distress Oxide in Salty Ocean to do the whole background. I should have taped this down. I didn't think about it. and it moved a little bit. I tried my best to not get like a halo effect around some of the stars, but some of them have it. But that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is, handmade. Everything that's handmade is not perfect. I had a little bit of trouble of getting the ones on the end because I didn't want to get my fingers dirty, and this is when I realized I should have taped this down, or I really need that waffle flower mat that kind of holds everything into place. But yeah, I should have taped that down. And then I was getting close to the edge and I was trying to make sure that I didn't take the stars off the corner. And then I realized, how am I going to continue the stencil? I thought that I'd be able to wipe it off and flip it over or just scoot it over. But then I realized I would be, putting stars back, maybe overlapping stars. So I cleaned it, tried to turn it over. That didn't work, and I just ended up deciding to scooch the stencil down a little bit and just retry from there. So it doesn't line up. It's not a perfect pattern, but it covers the whole front of the card. I don't make a lot of 5x7 cards anymore. The initial cards that I made, a lot of them were 5x7s, and then I moved to the 4 1/4 by 5.5, just because I felt like those were more manageable and I had more stencils that I would be able to use with that, and more stamps. I think that most stencils and stamps and things are made for an A2 size card instead of a 5x7. So there I go, just finishing up the very last stars on there, and you can see that some of them are a little bit lighter than others, but that's okay because the whole background is that way. Some are light, some are dark. I did have a couple of ink smudges on there, but again, I'm not going to worry about it. It's handmade. The washi tape did tear a little bit. I didn't do a good enough job of putting it on my hands to get some of the stick off of it. Now I'm going to take my ATG gun and put some glue on the back of the sentiment that I created. But I'm also going to take the makeup brush, the blender brush, and go around the edges to give it a little bit more interest. This is something that I learned later on in card making to give it a little bit more of a little bit more finished, polished feel. I learned to go around the edges with some distress ink, distress oxide, and it just gives it another little touch. So then I had some scrap pieces of paper, the same colors that I cut the the circle scalloped dies with, and I just cut some cardstock down for the bottom because this is how we're going to make the easel card. I used a blender brush again to just kind of go around the edges of the light one again, just to give it a little bit more interest. And then I'm using my water to clean off my mat because I'm terrible with that. I'm trying to be better about cleaning off things so that I don't get ink all over the place or inky fingers on things, because I often get ink from my fingers on my project, and it's always at the last step when I'm almost done. So now I'm going to be taking these gems, and these ones are so old. I've had these in my stash for a really long time, and these are the Nicole Bling It 6mm adhesive pearls. It's 247 pieces. So I got this at AC Moore a long time ago. Obviously AC Moore is going out of business, and I was just there today to get some craft stuff for the girls, but I really haven't been there in a while, so I've had these in my stash probably since the very beginning. And if you notice, those pearls are going to be the ones that are going to hold the top up and what makes it an easel card. So I just wanted to go around and put one pearl on each of the corners, plus one of the pieces had a little crinkle in the edge on the corner, so I thought this would hide it nicely. So there's the card front. I'm almost done, and that's the easel part of it. Now I'm going to take the images and I'm going to take some Copic markers and color them in. I was just going to try to give them a little bit of shading, but then I decided let's just color them in. So the Copic markers that I used are N1, N2, and N4. And it's just very simple coloring. I really didn't do much shading. I just added just a little bit to the legs where the legs would overlap, which would be the N4, and then went back in with the N1 and colored it. This is not great paper for Copic coloring, so I didn't want to do too much blending. I just wanted to give it a little bit of interest. So it dries back much lighter than the initial color, because you can see it here. If you see the elephant's head and the back of the body is a lot lighter than the leg that I just colored, and that was this with the same color. But now I'm just using a little bit of N4 to just kind of go in and add a little bit of shading, and then going back in with the N1 to smooth things out. I put a couple of dots on there. I do like that. Nicole Spohr goes through and does that, and I like the way that her animals turn out. So now I'm going in and doing the lion, doing the same thing, and that is Y17 is the kind of orangey yellow color that I used for his mane and the back of his tail. And then I used, I believe it's Y13 or Y18 for the lion's body. And again, just very, very simple coloring, just kind of going over the paper. Didn't want to do too much to it because it's not heavy cardstock and great for blending. So once I finished coloring in the lion, I decided that it needed a little bit more work, and I just, that fur there just is lines. If I really had extra time or wanted to spend a lot of time on adding the fur to the body, I would have done some different flicking techniques and things like that. But again, I didn't have much time, and I didn't have, it's not great paper to do that on. So I took my Uniball Signo white broad pen, and I drew in some dots on the cheeks and on the back of the animals just to add a little bit of interest. I think it looks really cute, and I learned that from Nicole. So I think they look really adorable. And then I'm going to take some ATG tape and put the animals on the card. And we're going to put the lion on the left-hand side where the dog was, and then I'm going to put the elephant on the right-hand side where the elephant was in the initial card. My ATG gun was not working again. I think the tape got stuck, so we got a little bit of glue on the elephant's tail. So that's it. That's the entire card, and I'm going to show you the original card so you guys can see the old versus the new. And I've learned some techniques, a little bit of techniques now to be able to do a little bit of a different card. And then again, when I did the initial card, I heat embossed a sentiment on the envelope, so I didn't want to heat emboss again because my embossing gun really isn't great. So I used the sentiment from that same beautiful baby stamp set, says for a special little one, and then I just used the same exact Distress Oxide in Salty Ocean to stamp it. Salty Ocean Distress Oxide is great for stamping. It gives a much better impression than the Distress ink. So that's it. Those are the envelopes, and very similar in color. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you again real soon in another video. Bye!